Daniel Hayes was a father who thought he knew his only daughter. Megan Hayes was a daughter who thought love could never cost a life. But when a secret relationship came to light, their home in suburban Florida turned into a battleground. Within days, one would be dead, and the other would be in handcuffs. This is the shocking story of betrayal, rage, and murder that started with a single text message. Daniel Hayes lived a simple life in a quiet Florida suburb. At 48, he worked hard as a construction foreman and spent most of his free time at home with his daughter, Megan. Friends described him as strict but loving, a man who believed in discipline and family values. For years, he thought he knew everything about Megan. She was his only child, the one person he trusted completely. That trust shattered one ordinary evening when Daniel borrowed Megan's phone to make a quick call. As he scrolled to find the number, a notification appeared. It was a message from someone named Alex, filled with affectionate words and heart emojis. At first, Daniel assumed Alex was just another boyfriend. Curious, he opened the conversation, and what he saw froze him in place. The messages were deeply personal, discussing hormone treatments, surgeries, and the challenges of living as a transgender man. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized the truth. Megan wasn't just dating someone new. She was in a relationship with a transgender man. The shock hit him like a punch to the gut. For Daniel, who grew up in a conservative household and held strong traditional beliefs, this was more than a surprise. It was a disgrace. His hands trembled as anger surged through him. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and powerless. Every laugh they had shared, every father-daughter moment, now felt like a lie. He slammed the phone on the counter and sat in silence, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't answer. That night, Daniel barely slept. The discovery replayed in his head over and over like a broken record. He didn't know what hurt more, the secret itself or the feeling that his daughter had chosen a life he could never accept. Deep inside, something dark began to grow. The days following Daniel's discovery were filled with an unspoken tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. He could not bring himself to confront Megan immediately. Instead, he kept his distance, watching her every move with suspicion and silent fury. She noticed the change almost instantly. The father who once greeted her with a smile now barely made eye contact. Conversations that used to flow freely were reduced to clipped answers and long, uncomfortable silences. Daniel spent more time in the garage, the place he often went when something was bothering him. Neighbors later recalled hearing loud music blasting from inside, mixed with the clinking of beer bottles. He had started drinking more than usual, and his temper was on edge. At work, colleagues noticed he was distracted, losing focus on tasks that once came easily to him. Inside his mind, thoughts grew darker with each passing hour. He replayed the messages he read on Megan's phone, feeling a deep sense of betrayal. He told himself it wasn't just about her relationship. It was about respect, about the values he believed in, values he thought he had raised her with. Now, it all felt shattered beyond repair. Megan, on the other hand, tried to pretend nothing was wrong, though the weight of her father's coldness pressed on her every day. She wondered if he had discovered her secret, but feared asking. Every time she passed him in the hallway, his glare cut like a knife, full of judgment and anger she couldn't explain. The home that once felt safe now felt like a cage closing in. As Daniel drank himself deeper into rage and resentment, one thing became clear. This silence could not last forever. A confrontation was inevitable, and it was coming soon. 3 days after finding the messages, Daniel's restraint finally broke. The weight of silence and growing anger had become unbearable. That evening, as Megan prepared dinner in the kitchen, Daniel stormed in, his face red and jaw clenched. He slammed his fist on the counter so hard the plates rattled. Megan froze, her hands trembling as she held a knife to chop vegetables. She knew instantly what this was about. There was no other reason for the rage in his eyes. Daniel's voice roared through the house as he demanded answers. He accused her of shaming the family, of making choices that went against everything he believed in. Megan tried to explain, tried to calm him down, but every word she spoke only fueled his anger further. The argument spiraled into chaos, the sound of breaking glass echoing through the walls. At one point, Daniel grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it over, sending plates crashing to the floor. Megan backed away, her heart pounding. She had never seen him this furious before, not even during his worst drinking days. For a brief moment, she feared he might hit her. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The man who raised her now felt like a stranger, a dangerous stranger. Finally, Daniel stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Megan shaking and breathless. She locked herself in her room that night, tears streaming down her face. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating her with fear. She thought about calling someone, maybe Alex, maybe even the police, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much worse things could get. Deep down, she already knew the answer. When Megan told Alex about the fight, his first reaction was fear, not for himself, but for her. He knew Daniel's reputation for having a short fuse, and the thought of Megan being trapped under the same roof with him was unbearable. Alex begged her to leave, to come stay at his apartment, but Megan hesitated. She was torn between the fear of what her father might do and the guilt of abandoning him completely. Despite everything, part of her still loved him. Alex couldn't stand by and watch. The next afternoon, he drove to Daniel's house, determined to talk things out. He believed that if he could explain, maybe Daniel would calm down. Maybe he would see that this relationship wasn't about disrespect, it was about love. But when Alex pulled into the driveway, Daniel was already waiting on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight like a coiled spring. What happened next would be remembered by neighbors for weeks. Voices rose almost immediately. Daniel's shouting was so loud it carried across the street, drawing curious glances from behind curtains. No one could make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, rage and defiance clashing like thunder. Alex stood his ground at first, speaking calmly, but Daniel's fury only escalated. His face turned crimson, his fists balled at his sides, and for a moment it looked as though he might attack. Finally, Alex stepped back, realizing this wasn't a fight he could win. He left, but not before Daniel spat something at him that made Megan's stomach twist in fear. She didn't know what was said, but the hatred in her father's eyes told her everything. When the car disappeared down the street, Daniel turned slowly toward Megan. The look on his face was darker than ever before. Daniel's rage after Alex's visit did not fade. It grew sharper, heavier, more dangerous. That night, he sat alone in the living room with an empty whiskey bottle at his feet, staring at the darkened TV screen. His mind replayed the confrontation over and over, each memory twisting like a knife in his gut. He felt humiliated in his own home, a man stripped of respect by the very daughter he had raised. The obsession started quietly. At first, Daniel scrolled through Alex's social media, looking at photos, reading comments, and imagining what his daughter saw in him. Then the thoughts became darker. He started printing pictures of Alex, circling his face in red marker, and leaving them crumpled in the trash. His anger wasn't just about the relationship anymore. It had turned into something consuming, something violent. He stopped going to work. Instead, he sat for hours at the kitchen table with his laptop, searching for guns and ammunition. Detectives would later find searches for phrases like "quickest way to kill" and "dispose of a body without getting caught." At night, he wandered the house muttering under his breath, words Megan couldn't always make out. But one night, she heard them clearly. "I'll end this, one way or another." That whisper chilled her to the bone. She quietly grabbed her phone and started recording. The audio would later become a haunting piece of evidence, a slurred voice dripping with hate and intent. By the fourth day after his discovery, Daniel was no longer just angry. He was preparing. His computer history, his notes, and his tone all pointed to the same chilling truth. He was planning to kill Alex. Megan realized she had to act before her father did. She just didn't know how far she would go. Megan barely slept that night. The sound of her father pacing the hallway, the memory of his whispered threats, and the image of his cold, furious eyes replayed endlessly in her mind. Every instinct told her she was running out of time. If Daniel was truly planning to kill Alex, then waiting any longer could cost someone their life, maybe hers too. The thought terrified her. She reached for her phone and texted Alex. "We need to stop him before he does something." It was a message sent in desperation, her hands trembling as she hit send. Minutes later, Alex called, his voice urgent and panicked. He wanted her to leave immediately, to come stay with him, but Megan refused. She knew if she ran, Daniel would come after them both. She couldn't live with the fear of looking over her shoulder every day. That's when the idea came, the one that would change everything. Megan suggested confronting her father again, but this time, she would be ready. She told Alex not to come over, claiming she didn't want him caught in the middle. Secretly, she believed it would be safer if she handled things herself. She went to the kitchen and opened the drawer where the knives were kept. Her hands hovered for a moment before she picked one, sharp, sturdy, with a black handle that fit perfectly in her grip. She hid it under her bed, convincing herself it was only for protection. Still, as she stared at the blade glinting in the dim light, a sick feeling settled in her stomach. Deep down, Megan knew what this meant. She wasn't just preparing for a conversation. She was preparing for the unthinkable. And if that night went the way she feared, there would be no turning back. Friday evening settled over the small Florida neighborhood like any other, but inside the Hayes house, tension brewed thick as smoke. Megan sat on the edge of her bed, the knife hidden in her pocket, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would try one last time to calm him down. But deep down, she knew words would not be enough. When she stepped into the living room, Daniel was already there, slouched in his recliner with an almost empty bottle of whiskey on the side table. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. The moment he saw her, the argument erupted like a bomb. Accusations flew, sharp and venomous. Megan tried to reason with him, but her father wasn't listening. He was shouting so loud the walls seemed to shake. Then he stood up. His movements were unsteady but filled with menace. He lunged forward, grabbing Megan by the arm with a grip so tight it left marks. She screamed, struggling to break free. The smell of alcohol on his breath was overwhelming. The rage in his face something she had never seen before. In that split second, instinct took over. Megan reached into her pocket and pulled out the knife. With her father towering over her, she thrust it forward in one desperate motion. The blade sank into his chest, a sound she would never forget, a soft, sickening gasp as his eyes widened in shock. Daniel staggered back, clutching the wound as blood soaked through his shirt. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, then went still. Megan froze, the knife slipping from her trembling hands. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. Her father was dead. Panic took hold of Megan the moment Daniel's body hit the floor. Her hands shook violently as she stared at the lifeless figure sprawled across the living room, a dark pool spreading beneath him. For several minutes, she couldn't move. The sound of her own heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out everything else. She had killed her father, the man who raised her, the man she once loved, and now there was no undoing it. When reality finally sank in, she scrambled into action. She dragged his heavy body across the floor, leaving faint smears of blood behind despite her frantic attempts to wipe them. The garage seemed like the only place to hide him, at least for now. She wrapped him in an old tarp, securing it with duct tape, and struggled to lift him into an old chest freezer that hadn't been used in years. The lid slammed shut with a hollow thud that made her stomach twist. Next came the cleanup. Megan grabbed a bottle of bleach and scrubbed the living room floor until her hands were raw and red. She washed her clothes twice and stuffed bloody rags into a garbage bag, which she tossed into the outdoor trash bin. Every sound outside, a barking dog, a passing car, made her flinch, certain someone would come knocking. At 2 a.m., she texted Alex, "It's done." They met an hour later at a deserted park under the cover of darkness. Megan was pale, trembling, her voice barely above a whisper as she explained what happened. Together, they planned to dispose of the body in the Everglades the next night, where alligators and swamp water would erase the evidence. But Megan wasn't a seasoned criminal. She thought she had covered her tracks. She hadn't, and soon, someone would notice. 2 days passed, and Megan's nerves were unraveling. She barely ate, barely slept, and jumped at every sound outside the house. The freezer in the garage felt like a ticking bomb. Every time she walked past it, the metallic smell of blood mixed with bleach hit her nose. She tried to mask it with air fresheners, but the odor only grew stronger. On the third day, her nightmare began. A neighbor, walking his dog, noticed a foul stench seeping from the slightly open garage door. He knocked, but Megan didn't answer. Suspicious, he called the police for a welfare check, claiming he hadn't seen Daniel in days. When officers arrived, Megan tried to stay calm, forcing a smile as she told them her father had gone fishing. But the garage gave her away. The officers asked to look around. Megan hesitated, her hands trembling as she handed over the keys. The moment they opened the garage door, the smell hit them hard. Their eyes fell on the freezer, sealed with duct tape. One officer pulled a knife from his belt and sliced through the tape. When the lid creaked open, silence filled the room. Inside, wrapped in plastic and a tarp, lay the decomposing body of Daniel Hayes. The officers turned to Megan, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Her legs gave out as they read her rights and cuffed her hands. In the interrogation room later that night, Megan broke down completely. She admitted to killing her father but insisted it was self-defense. She swore Alex had nothing to do with it. But detectives weren't convinced. A search of Megan's phone revealed messages detailing their plan and the chilling text, "It's done." For investigators, this was no accident. It was premeditated murder. The trial of Megan Hayes became one of the most sensational cases Florida had seen in years. The courtroom was packed on the first day, journalists filling every available seat, cameras flashing as Megan was led inside in an orange jumpsuit. The prosecution painted her as a cold-blooded killer, a daughter who couldn't handle her father's disapproval and decided to eliminate him. They emphasized the cleanup, the hidden body, and the attempt to dispose of the remains as evidence of guilt. But the defense told a different story, a story of fear, control, and desperation. They brought up Daniel's violent temper, his history of bar fights, and the recorded voice memo where he muttered threats about ending things. That piece of evidence changed everything. When the audio played in court, the chilling tone of Daniel's voice made the jury shift uncomfortably in their seats. It was no longer a question of whether Megan killed him, it was whether she did it to survive. Alex, too, faced the consequences. Text messages revealed his involvement in planning the cover-up, leading to charges of being an accessory after the fact. He testified in tears, saying he never wanted anyone hurt, only to protect Megan. After weeks of emotional testimony, the verdict came. Megan was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Alex received 10 years. As the sentence was read, Megan stared straight ahead, her face pale and blank, as if all life had drained from her. The case sparked nationwide debates about family violence, LGBTQ acceptance, and how far people will go when pushed to the edge. What began as a secret relationship ended in blood, betrayal, and tragedy, a story that still lingers in whispers across Florida, reminding everyone how quickly love can turn into death.